The Master drops the paralyzed Buffy into a pool of water to drown, callously compliments her dress, and then uses the power Buffy's blood grants him to leave the church and head out to open the Hellmouth. The series ends on this tragic note, a testament to how a female hero was truly beyond Joss Whedon's writing capacity. Nevertheless, Buffy the Vampire Slayer occupies a significant footnote in feminist history. No, wait, no. That's not right. Buffy may die now, but she'll come back. And why do so many feminists call Joss a misogynist over this? From the very start, Joss has demonstrated a willingness to use male death and suffering to illustrate his feminist message. From Darla's date in the first scene of Welcome to the Hellmouth, to Jesse's double death in Season 1, Episode 2 of The Harvest, to Dr. Gregory from Season 1, Episode 4, Teacher's Pet, to the Owen fake-out and never kill a boy on the first date, to Principal Flutie in Season 1, Episode 6, The Pack, to Dave and his Cortona counterpart in Season 1, Episode 8, I, Robot You, Jane, to Morgan in Puppet Show, to Mitch in Season 1, Episode 11, Out of Mind, Out of Sight, and finally to Kevin and his friends being slaughtered in Prophecy Girl. But Joss momentarily kills Buffy in the Season 1 finale, and this is enough to make feminists dismiss him as a misogynist. I must stress that it is specifically the death to be criticized here, not the symbolic rape. I have never seen feminists bring up the symbolic rape, which is strange because that would seem to be greater ammunition against Joss than a bait-and-switch death of the protagonist, which holds roughly the same value as the bait-and-switch death of Owen. I would attribute this to the feminists not watching very carefully. Understanding that there is a symbolic rape going on requires more careful watching than just watching two people fight, so they missed that as well as a ton of other nuance that makes it understood that criticizing the death is pointless. They are primed to see Joss as an evil man pretending to be a feminist, don't watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer carefully, and then cling to any and all evidence that they think proves he's an evil, lecherous hump, and refuse to engage with the material in a reasonable manner. So let's talk about that symbolic rape. The raping vampire bite is a heavy theme throughout the entire series, as well as vampire fiction in general.
Eric tasted me.
Oh, I did?
Yeah, against my will, so technically you fang raped me.
Every vampire attack is symbolic of rape, and the vampire slayers and vampire hunters are effectively members of a task force dedicated to protecting people from rape, and punishing rapists through the fantastic metaphor of killing vampires. Every person who goes up against a vampire is under threat of rape. This element is present in Dracula, where the Count and his vampire companions threaten the protagonists with kissing them. Their version of biting is less overly bitey than cinematic depictions often are, for the big visual reveal of fangs, and is more like a literal kiss with some sensual nibbling. A scene early on in the book has 3 female vampires move to kiss Jonathan Harker, but Dracula holds them off because he wants to kiss him personally, and the rape metaphor and homoeroticism present there was very disturbing to readers of the day. Dracula is fundamentally a horror story. Nosferatu, a symphony of horror, even has it right there in the title, and rape as a metaphor is very overt as an aspect of that horror. Dracula positions several male heroes in a battle against this terrifying bisexual rapist figure to defend the helpless Mina and Lucy from the sexual threat that Dracula represents. But they also fight to defend themselves. Dracula is a sexual threat to everyone, and his female companions specifically go after men. This aspect isn't discussed very much because of homophobia, heterosexism, and a denial of men's sexual vulnerability, but any vampire historian should be able to tell you that it is in the text, if only as sub. It makes sense for a male hero dealing with vampires to one day be bitten himself. If Buffy the Vampire Slayer starred a male character, it would be the same thing. All that I would ask of it is that it be treated with the same level of seriousness as a vampire biting a woman, and not have the man's sexual vulnerability be discounted, like Jesse's in Welcome to the Hellmouth. Thomas Hutter's bite isn't treated with that kind of overt sexual vulnerability, but it's also done within the context of homoerotic subtext, so I find it forgivable. As a bit of a Jonathan Harker figure, it makes sense that Buffy would at some point be the victim of a vampire bite herself. As long as she were treated with the proper respect, I wouldn't mind it.
Duh. Yes.
But of course, Buffy doesn't just occupy the role of Jonathan Harker, she is also Ellen Hutter, and the Master biting her must be interpreted based on the parallels to Nosferatu. Nosferatu uses Ellen Hutter as a Christ figure, saving her people from this evil monster with one heroic sacrifice. Both Orlok and her die, and her husband grieves. The film is sometimes considered feminist because Ellen figures out what's going on and makes a conscious choice to commit a Christ-like sacrifice, while the men around her fail to solve the problem. I personally think that the plot is sexist because of how it forces rape as the solution, instead of allowing her to actively fight Orlok. But the focus on Ellen does make it better than various other male-centric vampire films, so I can understand the attraction.
Very attractive.
Ellen doesn't really have a choice in the matter. Having seduction as a vampire weakness is entirely arbitrary on the part of the storytellers, and if she can do anything, it is only within the framing of the antagonistic man as an active sexual agent. The Nosferatu spell is equivalent to the scenario depicted in Dollhouse, Season 2, Episode 3, Bell Shows, where a man engineers a scenario where he gets to manipulate his student into thinking that she has the real power when seducing him to get a better grade. He asserts this idea that women have the real power because they can manipulate men based on their sexual drives. An idea that the episode is highly critical of, and uses cross-cutting to compare it to the self-justification of a misogynistic serial killer.
She made me. It's not my fault, she made me.
That Joss would subvert this message, as it appears in Nosferatu, in Buffy the Vampire Slayer's homage to it, shows the consistency of his feminist ethics. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is superior to Nosferatu for removing surrender to rape as an aspect of the vampire canon, and making it all about opposing combatants. The rape subtext is still present in the Master's attack, but symbolically raping the protagonist is no longer a necessary component of his defeat. The element of prophecy makes it a little tricky, but the characters have enough active agency that the Master can be held as fully culpable for his symbolic rape of Buffy. That makes it a perfectly respectable combat scenario, in contrast to the forced plot thread of Ellen needing to surrender to Orlok. When the Master does bite Buffy, the effects are very different. Orlok is undone by his lust and turns to dust with the crow of the cock. The Master is just an antagonistic monster, and his biting creates an exchange of power, ostensibly one way, more on that in a moment, to benefit him at her expense. He leaves her to die and moves on with his evil plans. If this were the end of Buffy, it would be an inglorious end to that character. But would it really be sexist? Now, we all know this isn't the end. Buffy comes back and slays her way through 6 more seasons of the TV show, 4 seasons of graphic novels, multiple video games, and many tie-in books. But let's say she doesn't. Let's say Joss Whedon ran Buffy the Vampire Slayer like Game of Thrones, and killed off a central protagonist at the end of the first season. Would that make Buffy the Vampire Slayer a sexist show? No, it wouldn't, because it's not Buffy that makes Buffy the Vampire Slayer a feminist show. It's the respect for the humanity of the characters to make it a feminist show. In Buffy's absence, the other female characters would step forward. Willow, Cordelia, Miss Calendar, Amy, even Joyce and Harmony. The feminism of Buffy the Vampire Slayer is not in Buffy slaying vampires, but in human beings effectively fighting the patriarchy, and the patriarchy would never be allowed to win. Buffy ostensibly meets an inglorious end, but war is not glorious. Soldiers do not die noble deaths with American flags in their hands and stoic looks upon their faces. War is messy, hard, and brutal, and any responsible writer would not paint a picture in line with the depictions of propaganda. Joss Whedon does this plenty of times with his male characters, and it is only reasonable that for a balanced feminist depiction, he write his female characters dying in a similar way. And he does. Compare the series finale of Buffy with the series finale of Angel sometime. Anyway, Giles wakes up, and he, Ms. Calendar, Willow, and Xander discuss what's going on. The Slayerettes are suspicious of Ms. Calendar's intentions, but she says she wants to help simply because the apocalypse would be bad for all humans, even techno-pagans, and they accept that reasoning. At this point, the show presents her as a bit of a rogue agent, who helps the Scoobies out of convenience, like an early version of Anya or Chipped Spike. I much prefer her Season 2 characterization as just a person who wants to help out of the goodness of her heart. But the allied villain angle is interesting. Giles just wants to research and prepare for the vampire's attempt to open the Hellmouth, but Xander wants to go help Buffy. As he doesn't have an anointed one to follow, he goes for the next best thing, his arch-rival Angel. Come to think of it though, I bet he could have just called for the anointed one and had him perform his role a second time. The poor guy already did the one thing he was good for in the whole apocalypse. I bet he's desperate to do something else. I can just imagine him leading all sorts of random people to the underground church just so he can have something to do.
Look, I have one job on this lousy ship. It's stupid, but I'm gonna do it, okay?
Xander working with Angel is in parallel to Quincy Morris working with Arthur Holmwood to defend Lucy from Count Dracula after the Count kisses her. In the novel, the two admirers of one woman work together just fine. In Prophecy Girl, it's a bit more trying. Angel doesn't want to interfere in the prophecy, but Xander implores him. He has a cross, but he doesn't want to use it. He has a grudge against vampires, but he loves Buffy and is willing to trust Buffy's opinion of Angel. And he asks Angel to prove that this is the right decision and to illustrate his humanity by helping Xander save Buffy. And how can Angel say no to something like that? Xander has been a bit of a jerk throughout the whole season, but Willow called him out on it. And this shows the start of his transition towards being the heart of the group. I think the character of Xander in Season 1 just wasn't done very well. The unaired pilot had him as a cute and actually nice guy, but for the show itself, for whatever reason, they opted to make Xander an edgier figure. He's someone insecure over his masculinity in the presence of a strong woman, angry at vampires, jealous of Angel, and kind of a creepy pervert, while simultaneously being treated as though he were the nice Xander of the pilot. All they had to do was let Xander lower his guard and show some emotional vulnerability, but even Teacher's Pet focuses on his tough masculine exterior. But he will get better, eventually. Angel takes Xander to the underground church, just in time for them to observe the Master leaving. They find Buffy in the pool, dead from drowning as opposed to blood loss. Death is a hard thing to define. From my perspective, Angel and other vampires should be considered alive, just functioning in a way that science has yet to explain. But that's not how the Buffyverse has it. The prophecy specifically uses the old definition of death as the termination of breathing, not the modern medical definition as the termination of brain activity. Xander knows that CPR can be used to revive a drowned person, so he can effectively save Buffy while keeping true to the prophecy. She quote-unquote died, but it doesn't have to last forever. It's also an expression of the theme of new versus old, where the young people with new medical science can subvert ancient prophecy.
You have to do it. I have no breath.
Now that is just stupid. So many Buffy fans have an issue with this line. They usually cite the fact that Spike smokes to show that vampires do have breath, and they might bring up the fact that the first evil appears to torture Spike through drowning him, but the really obvious point no one ever makes is that Angel can speak. He uses his breath to claim he has no breath.
I have no breath. I have no breath. I have no breath. No breath. No breath. No breath.
It's ultimately just a contrivance to make sure every main character has a part to play in the finale. Angel serves as Xander's guide, and Xander can be the one to save Buffy. Angel is obviously more of a fighter, but Xander doesn't have to function as a main fighter like most male characters, and his big role can be to bring the female warrior back into play. I like how neutrally his use of CPR is done. This is the woman he loves, and the CPR is intimate, but he doesn't use it as a means to get intimate like a creeper, which is better than he has been, and better than a lot of other depictions of lust-filled male characters. I'm looking at you, Sandlot. It's just treated as an administration of life-saving medical treatment. It works, of course. He finally gets to save Buffy as he wanted to in his fantasy and Teacher's Pet, but he doesn't have to steal the show away from her, and he doesn't have to have her fall in love with him. His service to her and her story can be the resolution of his arc. This action is parallel with Quincy Morris working with Jonathan Harker to save Mina's life at the end of the book. Count Dracula enthralls Mina, kisses her, and makes her drink his blood, which starts her on the process of becoming a vampire like the three sisters. The menfolk attack Dracula, and Quincy is the one to lay the killing blow with a blessed knife to the heart, thus freeing Mina from the spell. We've seen a similar thing transpire here with the Master biting Buffy, killing her, and Xander saving her, but the scene is stripped of Dracula's patriarchal action, and has Xander administer medical care as a means of bringing the female character back into play as a warrior, and it is she who will kill the Master. Meanwhile, the Scoobies reason that the Hellmouth is situated under the bronze. That's where the harvest took place, and that's where the prom is being held now. It is just like a teen show to end at the prom, and the dance is where the action took place in the movie, so I imagine quite a few people were fooled by this misdirect in the show's original run. Willow and Ms. Calendar go to warn the people at the prom, but they encounter a horde of vampires advancing on the school. Fortunately, Cordelia is there to warn Kevin in their old makeout spot, and she lets them into the car. They realize that the school is the real site of the Hellmouth. It's a wonderful extension of the metaphor for dealing with life as a teenager. High school literally rests on the portal to hell. They need to get back to the library to warn Giles, and Cordelia takes the extremely direct approach. Aside from being an action scene approaching the level of Hollywood, it functions as a subversive statement against the institutions of authority, as will ultimately be handled much more dramatically in the Season 3 finale. They hole up in the library as the vampires try to force their way in. The Master climbs up to the school roof and uses his powers to open the Hellmouth, releasing an old one, a giant brown tentacled many-headed demon that attacks the library from the floor up and makes sounds that I'm pretty sure were ripped off from Jurassic Park. I don't think this thing gets a name, but it does get a makeover in Season 3, Episode 13, The Zeppo. The Scoobies struggle. What they need is a hero. After the ordeal with dying and coming back to life, Buffy is different. She says that she's changed, that she now feels strong, even though by all accounts she should be worse for the wear. The Master dropping her into the pool and her coming out of it is symbolic of a baptism.
We wanted to do kind of death and resurrection. Buffy, fans will recall, drown at the end of season 1. This mythic imagery of it's a baptism. It's a very kind of Christian Baptist image of rebirth through water. And she is now reborn.
And is now a better, stronger Slayer. One with an intuitive sense of where the Master is, and the ability to defeat him. The reason for this is unclear, and the plot thread was dropped in Season 2, so it's impossible to know for sure what Joss intended. But my personal theory is that the Master biting her created a two-way power transfer. The Master got some of her Slayer strength, but she also got some of his vampire strength. I suspect it had to do with the origin of her powers, which in an early conception could have been vampiric in nature, as might be hinted at by Count Dracula. This would also fit in as a parallel to Mina receiving Dracula's baptism of blood, and slowly transforming into a vampire. I interpret our baptized Buffy as now part vampire, and stronger than either Slayer or vampire independently. This is also most likely hinted at through foreshadowing in the episode Nightmares. Buffy has nightmares of the Master killing her, in a very similar manner to how he would eventually kill her, implying that the dreams are prophetic. The dreams continue with her becoming a Slaypire. It is reasonable to presume that this is also prophetic. The Master says that prophecies are tricky creatures, and it doesn't have to be literal. Buffy's prophetic dream in Season 2, Episode 13, Surprise, contains a number of symbols, including Drusilla as a representation of, depending on the interpretation, Angel's evil vampire side, or Buffy's lust. The Slaypire transformation could easily be symbolic of a transformation that she undergoes connected to vampirism that gives her the power to defeat the Master, as represented by the Ugly Man, but we'll probably never know for sure. As this new Super Slayer, she leads Xander and Angel to the school, tells them to cover her, and climbs onto the school roof to face the Master a second time. Xander does get to be an active fighter, but in a secondary role to Buffy herself and out of the narrative spotlight. Giles also gets to sink an axe in the old one's head, and Cordelia even gets to bite a vampire's hand. Buffy greets the Master with a series of quips, each one of which is gold. The Master is completely thrown off by the fact that he didn't succeed in killing Buffy.
You were destined to die. It was written.
What can I say? I flunked the written.
A lot of feminists really don't like that line, as they feel it emphasizes Buffy as a blonde bimbo sort of character. Perhaps for this reason, Buffy is later written as a bit of a stealth nerd who does well in school, makes jokes off of obscure historical references, and has a debate with Willow over the French Revolution. I don't think her performing badly in school is necessarily sexist, though. Buffy is shown to be smart when it comes to fighting monsters, and your own passions should be enough, not having to perform to the expectations of adults. All that academic tests are really good for is testing the ability to take tests. The Master tries to enthrall her again. It seems to work, with Buffy exposing her throat, but she uses the vantage to call him ugly, and attacks him while he's reeling from his thrall failing. I'm undecided about whether or not Nosferatu could be said to be a feminist film for its day, but it's got nothing on Buffy's fight with the Master. If it is feminist, it's extremely dated feminism.
It's carbon dating.
The world of Nosferatu is contrived to make Ellen a victim. Even if she has active agency within the confines of her extreme situation, the boundaries of that situation are arbitrarily defined to make her a victim of sexual assault. In contrast, Buffy has the ability to defeat the Master in active combat. The vampire's domination of her does not have to be his only weakness. Nosferatu centers Orlok's lust. Buffy the Vampire Slayer makes it about two combatants and gives Buffy the upper hand. Say, is that a cockcrow I hear?
The spell was broken with a kiss of doom. He vanished into dust, left her all alone.
Orlok turns turns to dust upon completion of his lustful act of violence upon Ellen. The Master's flesh turns to dust when Buffy kicks him through a skylight and impales him, leaving a monstrous skeleton. The Hellmouth closes, taking the old one with it, and the remaining vampires either run away or Angel kills them off screen, or maybe just forgot about them. The group is now a bunch of disparate people who have reconciled their differences and become friends. Cordelia started out as an antagonistic popular girl, and now she is fine with hanging out with the people she used to pick on. Xander had his jerkishness earlier, but has now accepted his place as Buffy's friend, as well as that of Willow with no regret. Willow was once a shy girl, but is now fighting vampires with the rest of them. Ms. Calendar was once an antagonistic supporter of scary social change, and practically a witch, but now she is an ally and Giles' love interest, casually flirting with him. Giles, the creepy librarian with few social skills, now has an attractive co-worker interested in him, and a group of kids who accept him as a father figure. Angel is the weirdest one of the bunch as a vampire, but he has been accepted by this group of vampire hunters, and he now shyly flirts with Buffy like he's just one of the students. Buffy, once an aloof popular girl, is now a hero figure adored by all. All of these various characters head out to the prom, not because it's the most important event of their lives, as many teen dramas depict, but because it's the big event in town, and it's something that these friends can check out. The war is not over. There are still vampires and other monsters out there, and it's possible that someone might try to open the Hellmouth again. But for now, disaster is averted. The day is saved, thanks to a female hero and her brave companions. The episode closes on the Master Skeleton, calling to mind both the existing threat and the ability to defeat it. And so concludes Prophecy Girl and Season 1 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Wow. Prophecy Girl is a fantastic piece. From an entertainment standpoint, maybe not so much. Sarah Michelle Gellar does a fantastic performance, but it might only have appeal as the final chapter of Season 1, which very few people actually like. The season is full of missteps, and it doesn't have a lot of rewatchability, so the season finale may not have as much rewatchability either. From a feminist perspective, however, the episode is amazingly good. As a send-up to Nosferatu, it slays. It recreates a lot of the important beats of the original film, serving as a great homage to classic vampire fiction, and it powerfully subverts the less than perfectly feminist portions. Buffy ends up as a merge of Jonathan Harker and Ellen Hutter in such a way that she emerges as a female hero. Not a woman who acts like a man, but a woman who wields power in a manner typically only reserved for men, while still being undeniably feminine.
I may be dead, but I'm still pretty. Which is more than I can say for you.
When she undergoes her transformation, she doesn't rip off her dress to claim masculine power. She keeps it on and slays the Master while having the appearance of feminine beauty. Joss was very careful not to make her heroism in any way diminutive, as is typically associated with strong female characters. He talked in an interview about wanting to make sure Buffy would be a hero, and not a heroine, which he found to be a condescending dismissal of female power. And he encountered a lot of pushback from the WB executives on the issue. This was a dramatic change in the use of gender roles on a mainstream TV show, and they were afraid that audiences simply wouldn't accept that. But Joss kept pushing, and the executives relented. And the result was a teenage girl character that audiences could respect, identify with, and look up to as a hero.
Only a woman can break this spell. You're in heart, who will